FDA podcast tonight. This is Freedom and Democracy, Part 2. Tonight we have members of the FDA. In an open roundtable, we're going to be looking at French Enlightenment, Simon Bolivar. We're going to be looking at the progressive developments in Bolivia. We're going to be looking at other aspects of the French Revolution. And the focus of this is we're going to be trying to understand the advancement of these societies in terms of democracy. Based on the FDA recent reports, France has scored the highest in the FDA global audit with a 91.25% out of 100. Venezuela has 85%, and Bolivia is at 78.75. So these are the highest ranked countries so far in terms of electoral fairness. So we're going to look deeper at this and how they're balancing freedom with equality and fairness. I'm going to open the floor now to the panel here, and we'll begin our discussion. Looking at the French Revolution and the French Enlightenment and the incredible ideas that were produced from that period, the ideas of liberty, the ideas of egalitarian, the ideas of fraternity, and if you look at Simon Bolivar and his liberation of the Latin American countries and his instilling some of the French Enlightenment into Latin America, the idea of separation of powers, the idea of equality, and if we look at Bolivia with Morales recently, he's infused a lot of equality into the Bolivian political and electoral system. I think a common theme between all these countries is that they were struggling over an oppressive powers. In the case of the French Enlightenment, they were dealing with a corrupt monarchy, and it was through that struggle that it actually spawned these ideas of equality, the ideas of fairness. We can look at Venezuela. For 40 years, they had a corrupt aristocracy in there before Chavez came in. So there was a struggle there before he came in. There was so much suppression. Thousands of people were killed during that reign. The disparity in wealth was immense. Basically, a 10% aristocracy in Venezuela was taking most of the wealth of the country. So it would appear that this kind of spawned some kind of positive development in terms of Venezuela. And if we look at Bolivia, they were colonized by the Spaniards, and then you can link in imperialism in there. So through those two forces, it's actually spawned some really positive developments in those countries. So it would seem to me that there's a constant theme of struggle in all these countries. Struggle for liberty, struggle for equality, struggle for fairness, which has produced really, really positive things out of it. Does anyone want to comment on that?
Well, I think with the French Revolution, a big starter of it was the financial crisis, and regarding that disparity of or the distribution of wealth to all the citizens, and when those citizens, when especially Paris grew to be about, I think it was about 600,000. It was the second largest city in Europe, and the citizens started to become a little more aware that their strength in numbers really had a say in the aristocracy that the country held and that the monarchy held. Sorry, and so I think at that time when there was tax restructuring, and after like the debt and tax crisis that kind of underwent the French Revolution, I know that the people really had a say in what kind of distribution of that wealth they wanted, and I think that was a great start to the equality system that they wanted to undergo in France. And obviously from there on, with everyone coming over to the West, that those kind of values obviously got instilled into, especially Venezuela and Bolivia. We can see with Bolivar and trying to gain that equality system in South America. So I think with what happened in the French Revolution, and I'm sure as we'll talk about as he kind of started the whole idea of equality and fraternity, was a great starter to kind of where we're at now.
Yeah, it's really interesting because if you look at the Declaration of Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, which basically established the rights of the French citizens before they actually had the new French Constitution. In there, one of the first articles, it talks about equality of opportunity. It's not just equality of rights, equality of say, and things like that, but equality of opportunity. I think that's huge, because we can apply this to democracy and the quality of political opportunity. And we've seen that to be a huge issue in some countries, even Western countries, where there is an equality of opportunity, where there's a lot of smaller parties, newer parties, that don't have the same opportunity. Because there's a privileged, large, established parties. We can see that in the United States with the Republicans and Democrats. They have a huge advantage over the smaller parties in the U.S. There is not equality of opportunity there. We can see this in Canada as well. The Liberals, NDP, and the Conservatives have a huge advantage. But if we turn to the countries that are really excelling, in France, there is incredible opportunity for all parties. They restrict the media ownership concentrations there. There's caps on electoral spending. We can look at Venezuela. It's a very pluralistic media. They also there's no caps on spending, but the Electoral Council has a mandate to help ensure a fair, equal diffusion of electoral propaganda. We can look at Bolivia and its media concentration laws, where the TV and radio sectors are divided equally between the private sector, the government, and social groups and indigenous groups. So I think that's a really important thing, the quality of opportunity. And you mentioned Babeuf during the French Enlightenment. He was one of the founding fathers of egalitarianism. Unfortunately, he was killed for his efforts during the French Revolution, but it's amazing that he had these ideas. He came up with these ideas, seeing what was going on around him. And I'm going to go back to the oppression. The oppression of the monarchy is help wake up people to what their rights are and what their opportunities. I think hopefully we can see this in some of these Western countries where I would argue that there's a corporate class that has an unfair advantage over the populace. So I think in the FDA we are waking up to that and realizing that our people's rights are not definitely not equal.
I think that's a big thing with the Middle East too. What's kind of sparked a lot of global controversy now, that all started in Egypt and now Yemen and Libya. Everyone's looking for everyone's poster says that they want freedom, and I think that there's a big difference in what we're trying to talk about between freedom and equality. And as we can see through the FDA global audits, that having unlimited freedom can be a hindrance to how fair an electoral system can be and how well democracy can be, I guess, run in specific countries. And I think that, especially in the case of France, their control of freedom by having, I guess, an ideal amount of freedom can help make their system more equal and more fair.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The idea that it's not just liberty. And I think that's where the Americans have gone on the wrong trajectory in terms of their democracy. What they took out of the French Enlightenment was liberty. But that's only one aspect of a true democracy. You need the equality, you need the fairness also linked in there. And we established that in our last Freedom and Democracy podcast. So we want a balance between these three. And the optimum state of democracy would be where there's a balance between these three concepts, where none of them are overseeding the others. They're nicely imbalanced. That would be the optimal state of democracy. It wouldn't be perfect. It would just be the optimal, in the sense that you couldn't improve on that. France is very close to that state. Venezuela, in its legislative constitutional form right now, is very close as well. 15 percentage points off. Bolivia is extremely close now in its constitutional legislative state. It just needs some tinkering. As we say in the Bolivian FDA electoral fairness report that was just put out last week, it just needs some minor tinkering, and it would actually be in that optimal state.
So, in your opinion, do you think that from what we've studied in the previous audits in South America, that they're more maturing as democracies and not eroding? Because these ones, the Chavez and Bolivia, they're more recent governments.
Yeah, I think it's extremely complex. What's going on in Venezuela? There's a lot of foreign intervention in that country. Any time a country has oil, it's going to attract foreign interest. It's well proven the U.S. is interfering in Venezuelan democracy. They're funding oppositions group. The CIA is operating down there. So we have to keep that in mind when we do look at that country. I think with in the case of Venezuela, with the conservative reign there for 40 years before Chavez came in, it was extreme favoritism of a certain minority group. They were exploiting the country's, the people's resources for themselves. It was like 10% wealth, 90% poor. So it was only a matter of time before someone would rise up and try and address that inequality, like they did in the French Revolution. In the case of Bolivia, I think it's, the Spaniards scarred Bolivia. They also helped it, but it was a scar on their country in terms of their oppression. And you can link in imperialism now, and like I talked about oil. That's intervention. That's interfering. That's oppression. You're trying to exploit someone else's resources for your own gain. You could argue that's what's going on in Libya now. They basically just, with all their power, those Western countries that were in there, they just snowballed over the Libyan military and the Gaddafi government, and now they have access to those resources. So I'm sure they would love to do the same to Venezuela. How do you feel, Antonio, about this?
Well, I think that the concept of equality, especially in Bolivia, is not right, because the equality means that it's equal for everybody. Okay, so just from the moment that the government decided to give 33% of the media to natives, it's not equality anymore.
Why?
Because there's a group that has somehow more rights than the other group, the non-natives. So there is non-equality anymore. That's a broken concept there.
But it's 33% to the private sector, 33% to the government, and 33% to social groups and indigenous groups.
That's why.
On top of that, it makes it very clear in the Constitution, there is no monopolies and oligopolies are not allowed in Bolivia. So that to me, it's allowing a very pluralistic media. It must be incredible there in terms of the media. Once that legislation takes hold in the country, you turn on the TV, you're going to have so many ideas. It's going to really inform the people, I would hope. But I think what you're getting at is the indigenous is linked to the government.
Yes.
So they're overlapping there.
Yes.
But there is no
In
monopoly.
practice, they are going to have a 66% of the media.
But there's social groups included in that 33.
Okay, but the meaning of social groups in Bolivia is natives.
What about
Social
women's
group
groups? Women's
is
groups.
like natives.
Women's groups.
Hmm?
Women's groups.
You can
Environmental groups.
Okay, but you can find any of those groups there. Social groups means native groups. Okay, and the government just make up that word social because social is not related to women groups, environmental groups, or whatever. It is related specifically to native groups. Okay, so from that point of view, there is no more equality. Just try to imagine something like that. For example, here in Canada, the natives, the original nations, are a minority. Okay, so they have some privileges for that because they are a minority. But what would Canadians think if non-natives people, whites, immigrants or whatever, have more rights than the natives want, which are a minority? That will be not fair, of course, and that will be not equality anymore. Then that's why I don't think that there is equality in Bolivia. You can read the Constitution and that's okay. In the Constitution, there is the concept of equality, but from the practice point of view, if the government just writes a law and he gets 60% of the media, there is no equality anymore. As well as natives have 7 seats on the parliament, and the natives are now more than 60% of the country. So there is a majority having more privileges than the minority. So there is no equality anymore.
But you got to remember, the government, during election in Bolivia, they allow free airtime on TV and radio to all registered parties.
Okay, but I'm talking of the equality concept.
But that's saying that the government, at least in terms of radio and TV, is going to be pluralistic because they're giving free access to all those registered parties.
I believe it's an attempt, especially through the legislation, but as Antonio says, like as of right now, it might need a bit of.
Well, I'm concerned. Yeah, exactly. Because when I read that, when I looked at social groups,
Okay.
I'm thinking women's groups, environmental groups, etc., etc. But you're saying it's only indigenous groups.
Yes, it is. In practice,
If that's the case, like they should have another category which includes all the social groups.
Of course.
Allow them access. Otherwise, yeah, you're going to have too much bias in the media, too much power, but that would be in contradiction of the Constitution, a monopoly or oligopoly. Right, Antonio? That's written into the Constitution. they will not allow monopolies or oligopolies in Bolivia.
Okay, but from the moment that the government and natives owns more than 60%, to be exact, 66% of the media, it is more than an oligopoly. Okay.
So someone can sue that.
Hmm?
Someone can sue it. Someone can file a lawsuit.
Okay, but we cannot put Bolivia to a very advanced project of equality or something like that, because that shows that it is not right now. Okay, they may be in a good path to equality, but right now they are not. So to be a equality, to make this concept of equality, to take that concept into Bolivia, you have to respect natives and non-natives as well.
Exactly.
Okay, and there is no respect for that now, so there's not a full equality concept working there.
Hopefully it will evolve in time.
Hopefully.
With some of the recommendations made by the FDA Bolivia report, that's definitely a big thing that can help the equality factor in that country.
Mm-hmm.
We were encouraging that in the FDA report on Bolivia. And we did make note of your comment there, that the 7 guaranteed seats they have for indigenous, for example, we felt that they should be phased out as the indigenous, as they take hold of their new rights and political freedoms. Eventually those seats will have to be phased out.
This is a perfect example of having too much freedom in the case of the natives in Bolivia, and that might be something that's been taken down from the French Revolution, or something that has evolved from Europe to be brought over to South America that we might have to look at.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, to get back to Venezuela, is that Simon Bolivar, he was a liberator of Latin America,
Of slaves.
of slaves, but also the countries from Spanish rule. But when it came to creating a political system, he incorporated some of the concepts of the French Enlightenment
Yes.
and British common law, but he didn't think the democracy we're talking about was right for Latin America at the time. So there was a strong-armed government. There was some a privileged Senate, for example. The president was in for his life. So if we compare that to Chavez now, and he's actually built off it in a different way. He's tried to incorporate more equality in there, even though it's a very murky environment.
It's a stepping stone.
Yeah. I don't think the two are the same. I think Chavez is trying to liberate South America in the same way, in a modern day, vis-a-vis through a South American bank.
Okay, but liberate from what? I mean, there's no more colonies in South America.
There's still Western governments are trying to exploit whatever resources they can down there.
Okay, but they are not ruling those countries in South America.
They do. They put dictators in.
Hmm? So there is no democracy.
No, but the U.S. government has gone down there and actually assassinated people and put who they want in power. The guy in Chile.
That was the 70s with Henry Kissinger. Is
Yeah.
that what
Yeah.
you're talking about?
Yeah.
The President Allende?
Yeah, Allende, when he was assassinated. He was a socialist-minded,
Well, that's a controversial thing because some people, almost everybody thinks that Allende just killed himself in the Moneda Palace, okay? So you can say that a foreign government assassinated Lenin. There's no proof of that.
But he was at odds with Western governments for his socialist views.
Of course, one of his deputies or ministers or someone was assassinated by the U.S. government, and
Yeah.
and in the history that's proved. But Allende was not.
Yeah.
At least we are not sure about
Yeah.
that, so we can say that.
But there are indicators that,
Of course.
yes, that's all I'm saying. So the reality is, as resources get scarce, there's countries that want those resources, and they're willing to go into countries and violate their sovereignty, and they will fabricate what they can to get in there and do it.
Okay.
So you can't deny that reality.
I don't deny it.
So in terms of again getting back to Chavez and the IMF, the World Bank, you could argue in one aspect it's holding countries ransom to debt. So I know one idea he had was to create a Latin American bank, which wouldn't do that to countries. It wouldn't hold them ransom. So it would actually give Latin American countries an alternative than rather than having to go to the IMF or World Bank.
We are clear with that.
Yeah.
Any government, any trying to undermine the democracy of a country is a bad thing. Okay,
It's going on now.
it's going on now, but Chavez is also undermining Bolivian democracy because he is trying to help this Bolivarian project that he has in mind. But it doesn't matter what kind of project or what kind of interest is.
Yeah.
It is a bad thing. Okay, so the Venezuelan government is undermining the Bolivian democracy.
By supporting Morales?
Yes.
But there's no rules that says he can't.
Okay, but if a U.S. government supports some other country, that's bad. But if Venezuela is supporting
Yeah.
Bolivia, it's good.
You see,
So
you
what's
see
the
the.
difference?
I didn't say that. I didn't
So
say
what's
that.
the difference?
No, I see what you mean. He's interfering with the people's voice. So they need to regulate that. They need to put stops to foreign interference. Right?
About 2 years ago in Bolivia, almost started a civil war. And I think CNN or BBC just go there and filmed some planes landing in Bolivia, filled with boxes. We don't know what kind of boxes or what that boxes had inside. But at a very difficult moment, what that planes were carrying, okay, and the planes had a Venezuelan flag on the side. So if you go to the news and you can just do some research about that, you're going to find that, and that's dangerous for the Bolivian democracy.
What was in the boxes, you think?
Propaganda, whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
But if you ask the government of Bolivia, they are not going to say what was in the boxes.
Yeah.
It was almost a very difficult situation. People died and everything. Okay. But what I'm trying to say is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where the help or the let me think about this. It doesn't matter if a U.S. government or a Venezuelan government is trying to interfere with democracy. It is they are trying to interfere at the end. Okay, and that's not good or bad in interference. It is something bad. So I'm not agree with you when you put some kind of interference in one side. which is good for you, and in the other hand, believe U.S. or whatever interference is bad. Okay. I mean, that's we have to be equal with that ideas too.
I totally agree. That's one aspect of obviously the Bolivian system that needs to be looked at and reformed. There's a number of countries that do not allow foreign interference. Canada, it's written right into the Election Act. U.S. as well. Ironically, it's interfering in lots of countries. Yet it doesn't want people interfering in its country.
What's the difference? Isn't it a fine line between interference and being an ally?
No, I'm talking about actual outright interference when you're funding opposition, you're funding coups, you're financing public protests. You're putting people in there to stir things up and to create revolutions from the outside in rather than from the in. I'm not going to comment on the relationship between Venezuela and Bolivia because I don't know enough about it, Antonio. Do you feel that they're having a huge impact? Like in the last election, you felt Venezuela had an imprint on that election?
It doesn't really matter because they are interfering anyway. Okay, I'm not against Morales or with Morales, but it is an interference at the end.
Yeah, and it should be about the people of Bolivia.
Of course.
Obviously, they're the ones casting the ballot, but as we know, the process leading up to that, a lot of stuff can happen, which can influence them one way or another. It's like what's going on in Venezuela now with the Spanish government. It just was leaked that the right-wing Spanish government has this year, like I said, funded one of the opposition to the tune of $5 million plus.
In which country?
Pardon me?
In which country?
In Venezuela.
Okay.
Yeah. And the U.S. is obviously continuing its interference there. They want to get someone who's more willing to work with them, right? So there's double standards going on around the world. There's a disregard for democracy, where these countries feel they can interfere and they will do it.
The almighty dollar plays a big part.
The problem in Venezuela is oil. Like I tweeted the other day, if Venezuela didn't have oil, none of us would probably be talking about the country. Obviously the U.S. wouldn't be spending millions every year on trying to undermine it, right? I still think, what we're seeing is a struggle in these countries. The French Enlightenment, the struggle over the monarchy. In Venezuela, it was the Spanish colonialism. And then there was a right-wing conservative movement there for 40 plus years, just exploiting all the Venezuelan oil for itself. And then if we look at Bolivia too, like I said, the Spanish were brutal in that country. The things they did to people. Can you shed light on that, Antonio?
Yes,
the Spaniards, they were brutal on the Bolivians, weren't they?
Yes, of course.
Can you talk about what they did to them?
Well, historically, I'm not sure, but it was a colonialism. They were trying to get rid of the native people by killing them, by segregating them. So it was incredible at that time, but it is not happening anymore.
Yeah. I think now it's more this, you could argue, like corporate imperialism going on. Is this need to exploit and resources, the natural gas, in Bolivia, the oil in Venezuela, the oil in Libya.
It's an issue that sparks controversy in every country, even here in Canada and the United States. They talk about who runs the people. Is it the corporations or the government? And that's still a big thing that we have to try to focus on and try to find where that equality can come from. Because especially if we're talking about these corporations that have their hand in every other country's pocket, I mean, what are they doing to their own country?
Exactly. Do you want to shed light on that?
Well, all I know is, I guess in the United States is a big case study where Walmart's a perfect example where they, I forget the number, but they give an equal amount of donation dollars to the Democrat Party and the Republican Party, and they do that to make sure that they have a hand in each of their pockets to make sure that they're given some sort of a reward in return for their donation. I know it's a large amount. I don't remember the exact amount, but it's $1 million plus for sure.
Yeah.
And so I mean that's just a basic example. And I know that there's lots of companies that try to have a hand in saying what laws get passed or what gets written down on paper. So, I mean, if I can only imagine another government, like the U.S. government, playing a hand in Venezuela, or another country playing a hand in another country's democratic processes, or putting their hand into their equality system. I mean, it's only magnified when you're using governments with governments in other countries. I mean, and then it becomes global.
Yeah, it's rampant, and it's a complete disregard for the people of a country, like Antonio implied. It's also a complete disregard for democracy. And it links back to what you said. It actually spins back onto the people doing it and how they're treating their own people. John?
Well, I think that's more so based in North America. I mean, North America is basically run by corporations, not by government. But in the case such as Venezuela, I think it's the other way around. I think government runs pretty much the whole entire country. So, for instance, in Venezuela, there was a lot of major oil and gas corporations in drilling for oil and gas, and Chavez just started expropriating all of these corporations and just decided to do things on his own. Just recently, there's two major oil companies, and I believe BP is one of them, that have actually filed lawsuits against the government because Chavez, the government broke the agreement in terms of what they were allowed to drill for. But so I think there's a lot of, in terms of Venezuela, I think there's a lot of more government influence than corporations, because there's not too many large corporations there, and the large corporations are actually run by Chavez. So, for instance, the largest oil company there is PDVSA, and PDVSA is a $90 billion organization, but Chavez pretty much dictates who's going to get hired, who's going to get fired, and he really dictates in terms of what will happen with that company.
Like a Russian system here.
Exactly,
Yeah.
Exactly. So there is a lot of influence in terms of how the voting takes place. For instance, the elections are going to be coming up next year, and Chavez is known to start doing a lot of major road works in the country and building new office towers and so forth. So the construction process has accelerated right now. Also, the price of gas, you can fill up your vehicle for between 50 and 75 cents. Not a liter, but your whole entire tank. So you could fill up your whole entire vehicle for 50 to 75 cents. And that's because it's a part of that contribution is coming from the government. They pay a large fee for when you fill up your tank. Also, he tends to give away a certain amount of money to the poor for them to go and buy vehicles and to help them out with education and whatnot. So I sort of think that sometimes the votes are a little bit bought that way. But if you're poor, you need a vehicle to go around, and you need food, and you need education, and so on and so forth. So it's sort of like a double-edged.
Why isn't it modifying the violence?
I'm not 100% sure. I believe the poor are so poor that the amount that the government has given is still not is still not enough, and so people have to go out, unfortunately, and use certain types of violence in order for them to live somewhat of a better life.
It's also polarized too, and the opposition to Chavez is helping to fuel at least some of the violence.
Correct.
Yes, but you got to remember too, based on what you said, Chavez is not acting illegal. Western politicians,
no, he's not.
Western politicians do that year round here.
Right.
So my question
It's
is,
par for the course. He's not doing anything wrong. He's actually, as a leader of that country, he's making decisions with the people's money.
with the intent to improve their lives.
Yes.
But I believe that the country has so much resources. They have one of the largest oil and gas deposits in the world, and we talk about one of the companies, this PDVSA company that generates $80 billion a year in revenue. I feel that I think in terms of money that more should be going into the country than what it has. I don't think enough is going in. I think it's almost like the proverbial carrot that he's just dangling. There. I believe that there's a lot more money there that could be spent within the country, its infrastructure and creating jobs and so forth than what is currently going on right now.
But you don't have any figures, do you?
I do not have any figures, no.
Because I've seen percentages, and he's since the reign of the right wing government they had in there for 40 years, he's actually some of the percentages, like he's made it 50% more fair, 50% better distribution. Those are just general numbers, but there has been improvement. So that's something we'll have. We would
Sure.
Are the numbers correct?
Those are general numbers that I looked at.
But who makes up those numbers?
Exactly. I'm
See,
wondering for a government like his, he may manufacture them, right?
Yeah, but his whole government is premised on redistributing the wealth in the country. So,
see, it also depends where you get the numbers from. For instance,
Yeah.
the government, the Venezuelan government says that the unemployment rate in Venezuela is 10%, which is actually ludicrous, and the actual number is close to 50%. So he considers the person that makes baked goods at home and sells them on the highway, and so they can, basically so they can survive. He considers that an employable type of individual, even though they're not paying any taxes or whatnot, or somebody selling newspapers on the corner. He considers that person employed. So it depends also where these numbers are coming from. If they're coming from some type of governing body within Venezuela, you might have to really dig deep into seeing if those numbers are actually correct, because unfortunately they're known to sort of embellish what they're trying to say. So again, it depends what has been moved around in terms of dollar figures.
So my question is, what's the easy first step to improve these democratic processes so that this kind of stuff doesn't happen?
I think a lot of outside sources need to come in and do their own type of basically internal audits in terms of what's going on. So not using his own government or his own people to produce these numbers, to have actually outside sources actually come in and do their own type of audit to see exactly and realistically what's going on, because we can. The government can say whatever they want in order to satisfy the majority, but what's actually out there are two different scenarios. So I think if you bring in an outside source or a consultant, so to speak, or whatnot, to actually go in and actually look at what's happening, then we might have a better understanding in terms of what's happening.
well, they already do that in terms of elections.
Mm-hmm.
There's international observers coming in.
Right. Even on the elections, though, when people vote, it's a little odd there. The way that I understood how they do the voting is, when you go and actually vote, you have to give your name, an address, and so forth where you reside, and you actually go to a computer terminal, and then you punch in who you want to vote. They actually know, and it's actually been shown that they actually know who that person voted for, and if this person works at a certain company, such as PDVSA, for instance, the large oil company, they could actually get. They're actually would be afraid to be terminated.
Regulation.
I've heard
So-
that the same thing.
Yeah,
I
so
met
they actually, so
somebody
when a
that-
person goes and votes, they actually know what that person voted, how
Yeah.
that person voted, and that's not the way it,
How
it,
can
it
that
should
be
be.
fair?
It should be secret.
It should be that
Yeah.
right. What it should be and what it
Yeah.
is two different
Well,
things.
all I know is the Carter, like, we're going to be doing our own audit in Venezuela. So, but
With a ground assessment.
yeah, I know in 2008 the Carter Institute, another democracy organization, did an audit down there, and it was actually a referendum, and it came out with fairly high colors, high standard through that. I know there's some issues with the computer technology. It is slowly spreading in Western democracies as well, so I'm sure there's going to be issues with it as it gets. They're going to have to work out kinks with it.
But we don't vote that way.
It's heading that way, guys. Technology, people are going to be able to. I think in the States they're using.
I think
computers.
electronic voting. I think that
Yeah.
shouldn't be the way to go, and the reason being is because with electronic voting, it could be, I don't know, it doesn't matter how you put it. It can be traced and tracked in certain kind of
Yeah.
ways.
It is no longer
It is.
easier.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean,
Yeah.
you can still find out who voted for who and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I think the electronic voting process it really needs to be looked at because I'm not sure if it's really a fair way of doing it. I mean, the way that we do it here, we give our identification. We actually mark on a piece of paper on a ballot, and then it goes into a box. And
Yeah.
I think that's probably the best way in terms of fairness of how it could be determined who who legally won a certain election
Without fear.
without fear. Exactly.
Yeah.
Now to have it electronically, something goes on in the background, or somebody can manipulate
Yeah.
technology or whatnot. So I truly believe unless we live in a perfect society where fairness is in play, that's still that would be a touchy area.
So this came up in the case of Bolivia
Okay.
when we did the electoral audit on Bolivia. In Bolivia, voting is mandatory, and if you don't vote, there are fairly severe consequences in terms of losing. Say you work for the government, you would lose that job.
Well, actually, you're not going to lose the job, but you are not going to be hired by the government. You can use banks. You can do any money transfer or whatever. You can get paid. You cannot travel, and if you lost your passport, you cannot get a new one if you don't vote.
So you can't use the banks, you cannot travel outside the country, and you cannot get hired by the government. And the government's probably the biggest hirer in the country.
I'm not really sure.
Yeah, one of them. But in the case of Bolivia, obviously with the electronic voting, that could be undermined. But right now with the ballot, people can go in there
And that's another issue. So so it's you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. So you have paper ballots, and those obviously could be easily manipulated, and then you have electronic, and that can be manipulated as well.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit, it's a catch-22. So it's a little bit difficult to come up with a perfect system.
But in fairness to Venezuela, they do have a lot of international observers at the elections, watching over things. Also, getting back to another point, you can't fault Chavez for nationalizing some industries.
Okay, but let me.
That's not a
that.
legal thing to do.
No, but if you allow certain corporations to come in and create, set up shop there and create jobs and so forth, and you've made an agreement with the government that this is what you're going to do, you should stick to that agreement and not just say, well,
we don't know the full context of it.
but we don't know.
Maybe they were violating some certain aspects.
Could be.
Either way,
Maybe
there's something that sounds fishy on either end of the situation.
Well, there's obviously reasons for it. Maybe
Right.
they were violating some environmental aspects. Who knows?
Well, that's obvious. I mean,
Yeah.
oil companies, that's a given, but that doesn't mean that a broken contract is Just
But we have to. We don't know the full context, so we have to reserve our judgment.
But what I think is dangerous is, okay, if you work for PDVSA and the government knows that you didn't vote for them, so what happens? Do they fire you?
They will terminate your employment. You're pretty much blacklisted, and when you try to get a job somewhere else, they know which way you've voted, and they know that you've been terminated from a certain employer because of that, and it will be almost impossible to be rehired again.
Okay, you were working for, and the government is also taking the shares of another companies. So the government runs big corporations there, and a lot of people work in that corporation.
Correct.
So the government wants that people to vote for the Chavez.
That's right.
And they know about that.
That's right.
So how many people are we talking about? I don't know, but it must be a lot.
It is a lot. It is a lot.
So what's the difference between that and a dictatorship?
It is in the other day I listened to a new kind of word. I don't know how to translate it into English, but it was some democratic dictatorship.
Corporate dictatorship.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
And,
That's a common.
okay. I didn't.
It's fairly common.
But it's dangerous from that point of view.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the power of these companies. Like, we're only looking at these the national Venezuelan companies. What about the private companies in Canada, U.S., Europe? Look how much power they have. They own the media, the major media. The major media is in bed with government. It's all interconnected.
Right.
They have so much power, they control the elections. In Canada, in the last federal election, there was a private media consortium of corporate media companies deciding who goes in the national debates. Only 4 parties out of 19 were allowed to participate.
We're allowed to participate, that's right.
That's worse than what's going on in Venezuela. That's complete discrimination right there. Complete inequality. Blatant.
Well, it wasn't the Green Party not permitted to
Exactly.
to be a part of the parliament?
Exactly.
Or whatnot? Yes.
But these are corporations deciding.
Absolutely.
Deciding who is on the main stage in electoral discourse in Canada.
It's just like the United
It's fraudulent.
States,
It's completely fraudulent.
when they created the super committee, when they gave
Yeah.
3 Democrats and 3 Republicans a chance to choose their 3 representatives for the new economic roundtable, and of course the Republicans chose 3 Republicans and the Democrats chose 3 Democrats, and no one else from the House of Representatives was able to be in on the super
Yeah.
committee. So I mean, it's like you said.
I truly believe that government and corporations are they are after the same. They're after the same thing, and they just go about it in a different type of way.
Correct.
I think that they both have the same type of they have the same type of agenda, and again, they just do it differently. So I don't see actually corporations or government being that much different.
They're also working in unison.
I think that
Absolutely.
governments.
Yeah.
I think that personally, I think that governments should be. I think it should be like sport, or economics. I mean, let the best man win should be the basic premise.
But it doesn't work that
But
way.
it doesn't work.
It
that
should.
The way
And
it works in our Western societies is those with the more advantage, those with the more access, the more privilege, generally win.
And that's exactly what we're trying to. That's exactly what
So
we're trying
we're
to portray
like,
to people. Show people the
imagine a
difference.
race. We're going to have a marathon. The winner forms the government. So in our race in Canada, the Conservatives probably have like a 5-kilometer lead, and then you got the smaller parties at the start line. Okay, and then the gun goes off.
I hope that they can see it as it's not. It's
So
not,
who's
it's-
gonna win?
It's not cheating, but it's a huge influence. It's like spiking your competition's drink.
Yeah.
That's going to make them perform worse.
But the irony here is, why not compete on your ideas, on your platform, on your representatives, who they are as people? Why not just compete on that level if you're so much better?
Because there's money involved. That's why, and oil and gas.
Yeah.
And that's why they call it liquid, black gold or liquid gold.
Yeah.
Look at where it got everyone.
That's
Yeah.
exactly what it is. Since the discovery of oil, it's been unfortunately for the last 100 years plus. It's
I
been
say
an
look
ongoing
at
issue.
Planet Earth 2009.
Yeah. Some
What
people,
happened?
like Ben Zabato from Mexico, he's not here, but he says oil is evil, right? So, but getting back to,
greed is evil.
but he actually says oil is evil, in the sense of what governments, corporations will do to get it.
Mm-hmm.
But getting back to Venezuela, we have to keep that in context too, because it does have that oil, a lot of oil, as you mentioned. So there is a lot of foreign pressure.
A lot of foreign pressure.
So I think in a perfect world, Chavez, his guard wouldn't be up as much. But he's going against the U.S. government. He's going against the Spanish government. He's going against other countries in the EU. Canada is interfering down there as well. So he's fighting all these countries.
Yeah, they're sort of muscling their way.
They're funding opposition. They actually did the coup in 2002. So we got to keep all that in mind.
Right.
So he's going to do things that may seem, oh wow, that's undemocratic. But if you look at the big picture, he's fighting these bigger powers.
But it still doesn't make it fair.
Yeah.
It still doesn't make it fair. You know what I mean?
But it doesn't mean it's not necessary in the sense.
But then it's like it's still like one of these countries in the Middle East where there's all sorts of justifications for why they are authoritarian, but they're still authoritarian, right?
But you can't say that to Chavez. It's a democratic system. He was elected, Liza.
But
they have elections. There's been observers. In Syria, we did the FDA study on Syria, and we saw clearly it's authoritarian society. The Ba'ath Party is guaranteed a majority of the parliament. They're also guaranteed the presidency. The state controls all the media. That's an authoritarian society. Venezuela has a pluralistic media. They have universities.
But there's also a question in terms of how we got elected last time as well. So there's some inconsistencies with that. Also, I'm not aware of exactly what happened, but from my understanding is that initially he wasn't. There wasn't a president for a few hours, and then they automatically elected him into the presidency.
When?
In 2008, I believe, or 6, I should say. So I believe there were some issues down there in terms of how we got elected last time, whether it was fair or not. So I'm not 100% sure on that. I would have to.
I didn't see any.
I would have to look into that.
I didn't see any reports.
Okay.
Foreign international observer reports stating that.
Right. Okay.
You got to remember there is opposition there.
Right.
It's being funded heavily to put out propaganda against Chavez. Because what do they want? They don't care about Chavez. They want the oil. They want a puppet government in there, and they want to have access to that oil. That's all they want.
That's all that it is.
And Chavez, what does he want? He's trying to nationalize the oil, and hopefully,
People.
at least his platforms is based on redistributing it to the people, and
So like a simple solution is making sure that other countries don't have their hand in the pot. It's simple.
It's easier said than done.
It is easier said than done, but I mean,
look at Libya now. These dominant Western countries teamed up on it. They violated the UN mandate. It was merely to protect civilians, and they ended up arming and supporting the rebels. And where's democracy now? It reminds me of Afghanistan when they went in there. And now they're just going to put some pseudo democracy in there. They're going to have some puppet in there, like Karzai, and they're just going to have free access to the oil.
Yeah, and
it's a joke.
Yeah, he's trying to.
Has nothing to do with the Libyan people.
Yeah, I mean Chavez. He's just trying to prevent anybody from coming in because once they start, it's not going to stop.
It's not going to stop.
That's the thing. So
they want that oil.
Yeah. So if you put one or two hands into the cookie jar, there's going to be a lot more.
Yeah. And you got to keep that in mind for Bolivia too. Libya is not on the same level as Venezuela in terms of oil and resources, but it does have resources.
Yes.
And people in these foreign countries, these foreign companies want them. And they want them cheap. They want to go in there, exploit them, and get out. That's the reality of the world.
It is.
It's a sad reality for the
It
Libyans now.
Or for much of the Middle East.
You know, we've written reports on Libya. Hopefully we're, obviously our reports being circulated. Hopefully we're having an impact, but I feel like it's just deja vu again. They're just going to put a puppet in there and they're going to gloss it over. Does anyone? We're gonna close this down now. Does anyone have any closing remarks?
Yes. From the point of view of fairness, I think we should, besides analyze only the laws and electoral codes of countries, also try to discuss about what really is happening there. Because, for example, in Venezuela, I didn't know that the government knows who is voting for them or who is voting, who is not voting for them. So that's completely unfair, no matter Chavez or whatever is on power now.
Yeah, but John said that. He didn't reference it. I've never heard that before. I know they started to use
That's
computers.
why I'm suggesting we should...
They're not everywhere. Computers,
We should
not
look-
all voting is
We should
computerized.
look at that too. We should look
Yeah.
at reality. We
Yeah.
should go beyond papers and try to figure out what really happened.
The ground assessments are going to be crucial for that.
That's the other half of what we do, Antonio. This is giving us the basis, and then we look at the application, and the two together will give us a real vivid
picture.
image.
Coming up in
If you only do one side, I agree, it's going to be limited. Even like a ground assessment, it depends how thorough it is. If you don't know the laws and regulation, you don't even know what to look for.
Coming up in September, we're actually going to be doing a second part of our electoral fairness audit on Egypt and Libya to see which progress has been made in the country. If I'm not,
Of course.
yes. So that's definitely going to be, those will be concepts that we'll be able to look at, and especially in those countries. Those are the two countries we're going to focus on in our follow-up studies. So
I think the issue we're facing now is we're seeing a lot of undermining of equality, of fairness, different aspects. Foreigners coming in. And it seems like the sad reality is that so-called democratic countries are facilitating that. And it comes back to your point, Dale. If they're doing that, what are they doing to their own people? So it seems like there's a lack of integrity there in terms of democracy. It's just kind of, it's convenient sometimes. The Americans like to preach democracy, but then they're really quick to undermine it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something we need to hold account
Right.
of those countries that are doing that. Does anyone add anything else?
one final note, I'd like to say that if you do believe in our cause, and if there's any way that you'd like to contact anyone from the FDA or research us further, we're available on Facebook and Twitter. We are also available online at democracychange.com. Again, if you believe in our cause, we do rely heavily on your donations, so you are more than welcome to donate on our website, and every penny counts. So we again like to thank you very much for attending this FDA podcast, and we hope to see you again next time.